there, I'm Fleur, and I will be giving you the BricsCAD BIM basic training, the 7th module to be precise. We will be giving you the Add Extra BIM Data module, and this module basically explains you how to increase your numerical level of detail of your BIM model. So what exactly is a level of detail? Well, it's just as much how much detail you put into your BIM model. So either you say, oh, it's a BIM model, but it's quite high level. We only have slabs and walls. We have a block representation of our door. But as you go on, you can add more detail both to your geometry, but also to your alphanumerical data. And that last part is exactly what we will see here in this training video. We will explain different methods, how to add more BIM data to your BIM model, and we will do that in a few different methods. You will see the structure panel, you will see how to classify BIM elements, both with the help of artificial intelligence as manually. We will see how you can define the spatial location, so which building and floor something is on. You can also see we are going to dive deep into BIM compositions and physical materials and the plies out of which these compositions can exist. And finally, we will have a section about BIM properties and a few specific properties, such as the numbering option. We will also see the spaces options, where you can say that an element is part of a certain space, etc. And then that will conclude this lesson, and we will just start with it, I would say. So come and join me. Okay, let's dive in with the structure panel. The structure panel is a useful tool to quickly add data to the specific subset of entities, and to check if the data was applied correctly on all entities as you desired. That is why in this section you will get to know the structure panel in more depth. For that, we will open one of the drawings from the starter files. We open the architectural model, and we will see in the structure panel that's now active in the BIM configuration that actually we just have solids and block references, so we don't have any BIM data yet. How does the structure browser work? As briefly explained in a previous section, the tree structure of the structure panel represents a hierarchical set of rules in graphical form. So if you go to the configure structure tree, then you will see that it's a set of rules which has filter properties and grouping properties and sorting properties. So if you want to organize the properties in the structure panel, you can do so by filtering them, grouping them, or sorting them in a specific way. Most of the times I use grouping filtering or grouping rules, so that we can easily group things in the same way together. So make sure that now you have set the default BIM configuration active. You can always left click in the hamburger menu and see that you have the BIM one active. What does this mean? This is a configuration file that's now active. It's a .cst file. It's a configured structure tree file, which is located in your support folder. So make sure that you start off with BIM. And then you should be seeing the same as me. You should be seeing the amount of solids and block references in the drawing, as no entities are classified. Now note that when you have used smart modeling tools like QuickDraw to create your model, it will already automatically classify parts of your model into different BIM classifications and spatial locations. So you won't start, like I'm showing you now, with a entirely the model. You will have a smart, halfly smart model maybe, but still you can see which ones are already classified and which ones are just entities in the BIM structure browser. And so here we will see if as soon as we classify something, the change is happening. But first, let us try to customize the structure panel and see how we can achieve this. So make sure that you have the BIM structure tree, and then you can say configure structure tree. Then you see a little file icon, and you can click Save As to make sure that we start fresh with a that we don't overwrite our BIM, our default BIM structure tree, but that we make our own custom.cst, for example. So you just specify a name and you click Save, and then now we are editing the custom CST file. For now, we are only interested in the building elements category. That is all the elements that have an IFC classification, that received an IFC classification, as we will do further on in this module. We're only interested in this, but if you are interested in, for example, filtering the spatial elements or the regular entities that aren't classified yet, that's also possible from here. And then we can see that we have some filter properties, grouping properties, and sorting properties. And the grouping properties is what we will take a look at now. And we see that first of all it gets grouped by BIM building, then by BIM story, then by BIM type, and further by BIM composition. Finally, the elements are sorted from A to Z on their BIM name, and then if they wouldn't have a BIM name, on their regular name. So let's say that we're not interested to see the elements that represent or to see the elements in groups according to their BIM building. Then we can right-click on the property and delete it from here, and then you will see that first of all it will get grouped by story. For the same story it will get grouped by type, etc. And what if we want to group existing objects by another property? Well, we can add a rule with the plus icon, which will open a new dialog to select the properties. You can search there, or you can go to the extensions, BIM, and then we can choose something from this list. In this case, I want to go to the quantities, and I want to find the thickness. I want to group based on the thickness of the walls or of the elements, so that I can see every similar thickness together. So I press OK. And now I want to move it down. So after the composition, I want to group on the thickness. And then we will press OK. And then this new grouping will take effect. But we will use it, and we will switch between the BIM and the custom CST file as we need it in the rest of this training. But here you have learned how to customize the structure tree. And we will see it in effect later on. So now let us classify some elements. In BricsCAD BIM there are two main ways to classify a geometry, either with the AI-driven tool BIMify or with the manual approach of BIM Classify, and we will use them intermixed in this module or in this section. So we continue in the file we were in before, and we select the two top slabs and use BIM Classify to classify them as roofs. So you can do that from the quad, or you could run BIM Classify with the sub-option roof. But if you find the roof icon in the BIM tab of the quad, you can also classify it as roof. Then, as soon as we did that, you will see a change you will see that a building elements category in the custom CST structure panel came up, and there you will see two elements normally which don't have a story yet, but which do have a classification. They don't have composition yet, and that's for the custom grouping way. Then we can still continue in this file, and we can now classify the rest of the elements with BIMify. So what does BIMify do? It will automatically classify any solids that are unclassified, and will also add elevations and floor sections if you want that. So first of all, let's launch BIMify from the BIM tab in the No Selection quad. So make sure you don't have anything under your cursor. Right click and select BIMify. Then you will see a context, command context panel. This is a panel that only appears on certain commands and which displays information regarding that specific command. And there you will see that you have the option to classify the entire drawing. And then you can also auto-detect the discipline. If you want this AI tool to work more towards architectural classifications, you can specify the discipline here. Then you see that we can auto-classify, in this case, all the solids and the block references. And these will be classified. Also, you can assign structural profiles. If you would have a column or beam, it would detect the profiles from this geometry. You can assign spatial locations. So basically, you can assign a building. You can make sure that the building and story of each element is set automatically correct. Then you can also create spaces or rooms where you can then see the area, for example. And finally, it can create sections. If you ran this on the entire drawing, you can create sections, either elevations or floor plans or both of them. And then you can click apply. And you will see in the command line that some feedback is given. And now in the structure panel, you will see that not only do we have building elements, we also have sections right now. And then you will see that all the building elements are classified, and they now are grouped per spatial location, because that's our first rule. And then in every spatial location, we will have the difference between all the different elements. And inside the elements, you would see the composition, which is none at the moment, but then for planar solids, which have a thickness, you will see the thickness property and grouping like we saw before. In this case, it allows us to easily distinguish between inner walls and outer walls, and we can later on apply compositions based on this. You can also see the difference between the regular BIM grouping, which is first the building, then only the stories, and on the walls we won't have groupings per thickness of the entity. Next, we will dive a little bit deeper into the spatial locations of BricsCAD. So you briefly saw that BIMify already made some floors, and it gave it an automatic name, floor 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Also, a building element was created to accommodate all these floors. And that's what we call spatial locations. They allow you to specify a building and story in a project per entity. And in BricsCAD, a BIM model file can contain one site and multiple buildings, and each building can contain multiple stories. The entities that are classified as building elements in the project will have a building and story property. and every building element in the BIM model will reside on one particular story within a particular building. So I can show you that by highlighting or selecting a wall, opening the properties panel, and you will see here that it already got a building and a story as properties of this entity. To explore which spatial locations we have in our drawing, we can right-click in the BIM tab, find the spatial location sub-option, and then you will find the spatial locations manager. It will have launched the command BIM spatial locations. And you can see that here our building has floor 0, 1, 2, 3 with an elevation. And our building has a name. You can still rename the building by adding or changing the name in the name property of the building. And then we press OK. And after briefly switching between two configurations, we can see that now the building will be called main building also in the structure panel instead. So you can refresh your structure panel by switching between CST configurations, and then you see the effect. Next up is the BIM compositions and physical materials. To further add BIM data to your drawing, you can add compositions to the entities of the model. They can consist out of multiple plies or out of a single ply. A ply is one type of material. And in BricsCAD BIM, predefined compositions are stored in a central database of the program, and they can be copied to the projects database, which is the basis lib as we saw in the previous modules. So first of all, open the BIM compositions panel, and then you should see this panel. If you don't find it, you can always go right click in the empty space in the UI, and then you can go to panels and find the BIM compositions one and make sure it's checked, and then open it. Now we can search with the search bar for roof, flat, concrete, for example. Then you can double click it to open the composition dialog, and then you will see what this composition is made out of. So it's the different plies, 1, 2, 3, 4. And each ply has a pattern, a name, a function, a thickness, and a lock icon. The lock icon is for the thickness, whether the thickness is always this fixed amount or whether this one can be variable, so that you can also apply it to if one of the, you can only specify one lock open. If one of the locks is open, the thickness can be anything larger than 205 will be accommodated by the program, and then this ply will be the variable ply. If you lock it, then you always will change whatever thickness the wall had before to this thickness upon applying this composition. You can access the physical material, which is here the name of the ply, by double clicking its name or pattern. And then you will enter the physical materials dialog. This is not the same as the render materials. Render materials are purely for rendering and aesthetic representation. The physical materials define the physical and other abstract information of the material, but they can contain a render material in them as well. So you can give a render material to a physical material, but in essence these two things are different. So the render material is purely for the aesthetics. The physical material is also for the properties, such as the hatch pattern, but also other properties like the function, which it by default has if it's applied in a composition, the name, etc. So you can press cancel and OK on the last dialog. And then we can actually drag and drop this composition onto our main roof. So make sure you drop onto your main roof. Then you need to verify that the top face is selected in orange right now. If it's not the case, like with me, you can press this flip composition button. What does this orange face represent? It will represent the reference face that will stay in position, while the other face will shift if the object needs to get thicker or thinner. You can also see the reference face as the outside layer of your composition. And if you press enter, the composition will be applied to your roof, but you don't right now. That's because the render composition material is not toggled on yet. If we want to display the render materials that the composition contains through the physical materials that have their own render material, then you can turn this render composition material on, and then you will see a rendered version of your model. You can now also create a BIM section through your model. And then if we zoom in, you will see that the composition exists out of different plies. Then we can stop the search and we can click the cross button. Now we see all the render materials which are either in our project or in the central database of BricsCAD. If we only want to see the compositions in this project, we click on the hamburger menu and choose Show Only Compositions in Project. And then you will see only the compositions which are already used inside this project, such as the roof flat concrete. So now we can also first select the other roof and apply a composition when you selected an element. Again, with the same manner, you can drag and drop, make sure that the reference face is the top, and then apply it. And also this should have a render material right now. And then the next thing which we can do is apply compositions to a set of entities. So we can find the correct entities by using the custom CST file, going to the building elements, and then we can find the 5 slabs. Maybe we edit the custom structure panel a bit more to make this even easier. So if I configure my structure tree, I will now say that the story is not needed for me to show, and then I press OK. Then I can easily find all the roofs, all the slabs, all the stairs, all the walls, all the windows. And if I expand the slabs, I could see if they differ in thickness, but in this case it's okay for everything. Then make sure your show only compositions in project is off, and then you can search for floor concrete insulated, and you can drag and drop one composition onto multiple elements. You will see multiple reference faces, of course, now. And then we press apply, and simple as that, we applied all the compositions for our slabs. We can do the same for the interior walls, and now it's important that we have the distinction between the thickness of the elements. So the inner walls will be thinner, the outer walls will be thicker. So for the inner walls, you can choose interior wall 140. And notice that now the thickness is 150. But here in our composition with one ply, the thickness is locked. So as soon as I apply this to my inner walls, you should see a change in the thickness grouping property as well, because now it says okay, all of these elements are a thickness of 140 millimeters instead. For the 300 millimeter walls, so the outer walls, we can select cavity walls. We can apply all of them. I tend to look into top view with perspective mode off to see if all my reference faces are at the outside. I select enter to accept it. And then I can switch back. And you see that now all my outer walls have a composition as well. And that's how you can give compositions to all the elements in your drawing, or all the not block references in your drawing. So the windows, of course, they don't need a composition as they are not solid entities, but block references. Then, to better understand the information which is in the current state of our drawing, we will take a look at the plies of a composition that we just added. So you zoom into the connection between the bottom floor and the outer wall, so like I'm doing here. And then you can select the exterior wall solid. You can go to the properties panel, scroll all the way till you see the wall quantity IFC2X3 section. And here you can read all the quantities associated with the plies as well. So now we are seeing the first ply, which is 1 is the ply closest to the reference face, or the exterior ply. And then it goes all the way until the interior ply here. So you can see all the data is there. And you can use the arrows to cycle through the different plies. And then to edit a composition ply geometry, we need to make sure that the composition level of detail is on. Because at the moment, even if I select my faces, I will only be able to select the entire face, the entire side of my solid, because this is one solid still, this slab. But if I want to edit every ply individually, I will make sure that composition level of detail is toggled on. Your selection modes, make sure that it's maybe only prioritize selection of faces is enabled. A bit easier. And then you can see that as soon as I hover near the end of a certain ply, you will see that the ply face is highlighted, and you will be able to do some actions such as push-pull. So here, let me cycle, and cycling through this sub-selection underneath your cursor can be done with tab. If I have the ply face here, you can quad select DM push-pull, and then you make sure to toggle control if you set your DM push-pull subtract to 0, like we asked in the beginning of this training. Now it means that whenever I'm push-pulling, I won't subtract from the entities which are crossing the element which I am push-pulling on. So here, if I now just click, you will have an overlap between both of them, because there is no subtraction happening automatically. But in this case, it's one of the rare cases with the plies where I press Ctrl to activate the Enable Subtract option, and then you can click on one of the ply ends, and it will automatically subtract from the outer wall. It will subtract the bottom slab. This so that you don't create overlaps instantly. Okay, finally we will dive a little bit deeper into the BIM properties. So every entity has properties. A line in a CAD drawing has properties such as color, layer, and line type. But BIM entities have these properties as well, but even more than them. So depending on the type of element which we select, such as the slab, you can make sure your prioritize selection of faces is off again, maybe. So select just one of the exterior walls, for example. And then you will see that a 3D solid is selected, only one you should see here. And then we have some general properties, which are properties that all entities have, so not only BIM entities have this, such as the color. 3D visualization is the render material. The mask properties is calculated based on the geometry of the solid, and they are not editable. Expanding the section can take time, as you will get a warning, because everything needs to be calculated. So we leave this collapsed if possible. If you don't need the mask properties of the entire solid, you can leave it collapsed. Then we have the BIM properties, which include the spatial locations, as mentioned before, and other specific BIM properties, such as the type. This is not editable, but here you can see the type of the wall, of the entity, which is a wall in this case. Then you will have some wall common properties, which are the Building Smart IFC common properties for walls. They are the IFC property sets are hard-coded and are used by other BIM applications in a similar fashion. So the wall common properties, you can, for example, find fire rating, acoustic rating, etc. And this is for IFC 2x3. If you want to switch to an IFC 4 schema, we will cover that in the advanced training. So also note that it will not always be called wall common, because if you select a window, it will be called window common instead. And the same for wall quantities. These are also calculated based on the geometry of the solid, but according to the Building Smart calculation conventions, and it allows you to see, for example, the length of a certain ply or the entire volume. You can also create custom BIM properties. So in the no selection quad, so I press escape to escape my selection set. In the no selection quad under the BIM tab, you can also find BIM properties. And there a dialog box will pop up to specify and edit the shown properties in your BIM project. By default, we have three namespaces: IFC 2x3, quantity, and user. User will contain the custom properties, quantity, the IFC quantities, and IFC 2x3, the regular IFC properties. So go to the user namespace, add a new property set by clicking the plus button underneath set. You can choose which name you give it, such as custom properties. Then you have actually a set, so that's a little tab here. It will represent a tab in your properties panel. Then you can choose which type of BIM elements this applies to. For example, if I only want to apply this custom properties to walls, then I select only the wall. But here we just apply it to all. We make sure it's visible, so that it's visible in our properties panel. Now we can add a property to the property set and give it an ID again, so cost, for example, a name. Then you can specify the type of data which you want to input: a boolean, which is on or off, an integer, which is a whole number, a real, which is an approximation of a real number, and then a string. You also can enumerate, have an enumerated list where you will then see a drop down between the different possibilities. So change cost to a real because it can have a decimal number. Then maybe we will add another one. So I add another property manufacturer. And we make sure that this is a string. And now we press OK. We select whatever BIM object we want. And now at the bottom we should see custom properties, cost and manufacturer. And I can now fill in these values. And here a string input will be asked. So that's how you can add custom properties in BricsCAD BIM. Okay, so in a BIM model we also might want to number the entities to add data. There's already a number property in the BIM tab of your entity. And numbering entities allows us to quickly identify elements, sort on their numbering, tag them when creating 2D documentation, etc. So in this section we will see how to manually number entities and how to do it in a semi-automatic fashion. For more advanced numbering methods, it's advised to do it with the help of some scripts. We can see in a later training how scripts work, but for now let's start with numbering manually. So we continue in the same file and we use the custom CST file again to quickly select and isolate all the all the windows in my drawing. So I right click and click isolate. Now we see all the windows. Of course, one of my sections is still clipped, so I select all my sections and I do clip display no. So now we see all the windows. And then we can select one of the windows, go to the properties panel and find the number in the BIM section. And then we can see, for example, this is the first floor and maybe the first window on the first floor. And then we can do the same for the other windows as well. We can unisolate the objects if we're done. Now, numbering in a semi-automatic fashion we will use another drawing for. So we will open the structural model of the same drawing. We select all the beams in our model through the custom structure browser. And then we launch the number command. You can also find it in the BIM tab of the quad. And then you will get a sub-menu, and also you will see the numbering options in the command line. So what we want to do is we want to only use the selected entities. We want to give it a prefix, which is B- for beam. We won't create a suffix. We will use the number style Arabic. You can also choose Roman or uppercase letters, etc. But here we will just say Arabic numbers, which is 1, 2, 3. Then we will sort first to the z-axis. So because we want to start with the lowest element and then continue upwards as the numbers increment. So first of all, the first axis we will sort on is the z-axis. The second one is the y-axis, and the third axis is the x-axis. Then we have the sub-option overwrite numbers to either keep or overwrite the already filled in numbers if none of the beams have a number at this moment, so it really doesn't matter. but if you would already have numbers, this can matter. Then the first index can be left at 1, the increment can also be left at 1, and then as soon as we apply this, so we see that the total number of entities numbered is there, we can select now a beam, and we can see that the number is filled in, B2. So now we can inspect also through the custom structure browser if we configure it a bit. Underneath the building elements, make sure that in the sorting there is also a number, a BIM number. So you have to cycle a bit between the other number options till you find the BIM number one. And then you move it upwards so that it first sorts on BIM number from alphabetically. And then as soon as I open it, you will see alphabetically B1, B10, B100, etc. So you can see if the classification is correct here as well. And then as soon as you configured this structure browser, you can also, of course, search on a certain element. So you press enter and then you will find only the B101. If you search for B10, you will of course find all the ones which include the substring B10. Finally, in a BIM model, it's important to make spaces. With spaces, you can calculate floor areas, wall area parameter, volumes of spaces, etc. This is convenient to quickly calculate the amount of flooring, paint, skirting board, ventilation flow that is needed to equip these spaces. On top of that, you can add properties to each space, such as their number for fire safety plans, or for the type of coverings you can enter, and maybe whether they're accessible for handicapped accessible or not. And then finally you can use spaces to generate interior elevation sections, or even generate your custom diagrams for floor occupancy by using type plans. In this section we will cover how to add and edit spaces. For other use cases of spaces, please consult the BricsCAD Help Center for further information. So first of all, we will open the architectural model from before again, and then we will open the vertical section which we made before. And we will see now that BIMify has already created the spaces for us, as we included that option during the command. So the space can be selected by selecting the number bubble or the name bubble in the model space. And yeah, if you selected it, you will see that now it will say 3D solid, because in the background a space is a 3D solid. But the most important part is that you see here that it's listed as a space. You will also see that there is a space common section where you can say which coverings, for example, the space has. And then you can have also the space quantity, which is where you can read the space quantities of the selected space. In the BIM space, in the BIM tab, you can see that there is also a representation property. This dictates how your space will be shown in the model. So standard, this is put on footprint, showing you the contour like we have now, and it can be changed to solid, and then you will see that it's actually a solid in the background, and the shape of the roof is also taken into account for the space. And you can see if something would be wrong, you can see it because the space will not occupy maybe the entire room. But here everything is correctly done by BIMify, and you can see that you can switch between the representations easily. While you're editing your BIM model and you don't need the spaces, I recommend to put it on footprint, as it doesn't get in the way of selecting slabs, etc. If you have it as a solid representation, it might get in your way to select the slabs underneath. There are also other properties in the BIM section, such as the update method and the status. When putting the update method on manual, it's actually expected that you direct model the space according to the changes in your BIM model. When you put it on automatic, you will instead be able to call BIM update space to run a semi-automatic regeneration of the space. When a space is put on a manual update method, you will not be able to run that command. In the status field, you can indicate whether it's out of date or up to date. When the update method is manual, you are in charge of changing this field accordingly. When the update method is set to automatic, BricsCAD will automatically detect when a space is no longer up to date, and it will change the status accordingly. So here we can say, okay, this is up to date, and then also your not up to date icon will disappear. So we can leave the status of these in the same fashion as we found them. And then we will see how to update the model and the spaces. So we will clip the horizontal section of the first floor. We can hide the sections for an instance. And then we see that here we have two different rooms. Let's suppose we want to create a third room in the middle here. So now the space encompasses this extra protrusion as well in the space. But we want to change this. So first make sure that this is set to automatic. To automatic, and then the status is up to date. Okay, as soon as we did that, I will DM push pull this face after L connecting, so that I can create a different L connection. So I want to create an L connection so that I can extend this wall to the next part, so I do enter. Then we highlight the end face of this wall, and I can DM push pull it. Make sure that here it's really disabled, the subtraction option, otherwise you will be subtracting from your solid face. And then you extrude all the way until it's in the other wall, and then you can union still to clean it up. And maybe subtract here if needed. Okay. And then the end result should look like this. And now we should see that this space, which we put on up to date before, is now automatically put on out of date, because we have the automatic update method. However, if we select it, it still has this protrusion. So we will adapt it to the new space by calling the BIM update space command from the BIM tab in the quad. And then you will see that the space adapts, it's no longer out of date, and here the footprint representation is now nicely until this line. So we could also, of course, have direct modeled onto the solid representation of the space, and as such it would have been possible to adjust the space to the new wall locations when the mode had stayed on manual. We can also launch BIM update space command on multiple spaces at once, for example, after selecting them with the structured panel. And in that case, only the ones that have their update method set to automatic will be updated by BricsCAD to follow the design changes in the model. This means that you can always put the update method of a space on manual if you want to have full control over geometrical changes of that space entity, even when launching the BIM update space command. However, we still don't have the small room here, so we can now add it. In the No Selection quad, in the BIM tab, you will find the new space. You will be able to hover over the slab inside the space we want to create, and you should see a check mark appear next to your cursor. This indicates whether or not it's possible to create a new space entity on this location. If already a space exists in that location, it will also tell you this, like I try now. Maybe your eSnap is turned on, and then you might be snapping to places where you don't want to put the space. So you might want to turn off your eSnap for a second, and then click the location when the cursor displays and the blue area is highlighted for the contours of the new space. And then I click it, and now I see that I have a space which is just the room we just created. So again, you can still now put your update method as you wish and your status, but this is the basic method of creating spaces in BricsCAD BIM. And this also concluded our lesson on adding BIM data. Okay, so this was the module about adding BIM data. We increased the alphanumerical level of detail. We used the structure panel to do this. We used classifications in BricsCAD BIM. We saw how spatial locations work, what compositions and physical materials are, what BIM properties are available, and how to number elements. And finally, we concluded with the spaces on how to make BIM spaces and adjust them accordingly. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and see you in the next module.